I want you to think of a specific stereotype about Black people that you've ever heard before. Maybe you can think of several. Black people are lazy, they're unintelligent, they love them some fried chicken. Have you ever stopped and asked where these even come from? When did they start and who even started them? Let's get to the bottom of some of the most prominent Black stereotypes, starting with some lighthearted ones and progressively getting darker. Now, one of the strangest but most common stereotype I remember hearing growing up about Black people is that they love watermelon.
Should I drink some watermelon for you, boss? I think I love watermelon.
Sir, do you like watermelon?
Now, this one is a bit weird because, well, who doesn't love watermelon? It's hydrating, it's healthy for you, it tastes great, plus Black people eat it at a much lower rate than other Americans. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that the whole "you love this thing because you're that race" didn't bug me a bit growing up, even though I didn't really know why or where it came from. But the more that I learn about this stereotype, the more I realize just how bad it is. It's bad because the connection between Black people and watermelon actually used to be positive. You see, after the Civil War, a Union general named William T. Sherman proposed the idea of giving 40 acres to these now 40,000 freed Black people, which Abraham Lincoln agreed to. But once he was assassinated, his successor, Andrew Johnson, who was his vice president, by the way, decided to cancel this and instead gave that land right back to the slave owners. And so it forced these newly freed Black people to rent that land from their former enslavers, which put them into cycles of crippling debt and poverty. But these now freed Black people used that land to farm and sell watermelon, and they were really good at it. It proved to be very lucrative, so much in fact that they were now able to buy their own land and create their own economic niche. But this was a huge threat to white Southern farmers because Black self-reliance and economic growth meant more competition for them and a hit to this white supremacy structure that existed at the time. And so they're prepared to fight dirty. They use their influence and financial capacity to basically create cultural campaigns rebranding this food, watermelon, as unclean and uncivilized, all while simultaneously mocking Black people. Think inescapable images of dark-skinned, red-lipped people biting into a watermelon. It was on postcards, toys, even household items, all with the intent to brand Black people as unclean, lazy, and buffoonish. So what once was the symbol of economic freedom for Black people now became a caricature with a negative stereotype with effects that linger even over a century later. In 1947, the year that Jackie Robinson broke the MLB's color barrier, crowds frequently taunted him by throwing garbage and slices of watermelon at him. A 1937 issue of Life magazine featured a section that read, "Nothing makes an N-word's mouth water like a luscious, fresh-picked melon."
I love me some fried chicken.
But you love fried chicken.
He really likes that fried chicken.
Maybe the only stereotype more popular than Black people loving watermelon is Black people loving fried chicken. And the backlash from this stereotype was even worse, with its origins again going back to slavery. You see, back in those days, slaves couldn't own large livestock, think cows or pigs, but they could own chickens because slave owners felt that it had low economic value, which was true until the enslaved Africans got their hands on it. Now, where the modern fried chicken is believed to come from is partly the Scottish immigrants who introduced frying poultry in fat. But the taste that we know today comes from enslaved Africans using the battering and seasoning traditions that stemmed from West Africa. And they found a lot of success selling this to Black freed communities and even some white Americans, especially Black women. They made their living selling fried chicken at the Gordonsville train station in Virginia, which was a very busy hub. You see, back in those days, trains didn't have food cars, meaning that the passengers had to find their own way to feed themselves. That's where the Black woman stepped in. They were so popular and successful at doing this that people would intentionally reroute their trips through this station just so they could buy some. In fact, Gordonsville, Virginia is known today as the fried chicken capital of the world, all on the backs of these entrepreneurial and talented Black women. And they used the money that they made to reinvest in the community by building churches. They used it to send their kids to college and bought their own homes. This is yet another example of Black people using their talents and work ethic to create financial stability for themselves, all while having fewer resources and opportunities to do so. But I doubt you've heard Black people being credited as essentially popularizing fried chicken as a staple Southern food. Instead, you get a negative stereotype. And the origins of it can likely be traced back to the controversial 1915 film Birth of a Nation, which is widely considered the most racist film ever produced. This silent film is packed with racist imagery of Black people, all attempting to end any sort of societal or economic gains that they were making in the country. One scene depicts a Black person sloppily eating fried chicken and carelessly throwing the bones away while passing radical laws for the time, like interracial marriage. This movie was actually the first film ever screened inside the White House in American history under President Woodrow Wilson, who's widely considered extremely racist even for his time. Not only did this film effectively end the momentum that Black people were gaining in the country, but it also gave a huge resurgence to the KKK, who the movie glorified as noble heroes. Consequently, the country saw a spike in racial violence. Now, if you, like me, ever wondered how people back then could claim to be living in the land of the free while simultaneously enslaving millions of people without feeling a little hypocritical, well, the reality is that many of them did. White slave owners constantly faced challenge of a rising abolitionist movement. Former slaves were now publishing books exposing the realities of slavery, which was originally sugar-coated. And the rise of religious denominations in the 1800s saw a spike in preachers who were calling slavery a major moral and religious sin. And each generation fought for its end stronger than the last. But the financial livelihood for many of these slave owners relied on society preserving slavery. And so they were not going down without a fight. So they introduced a weapon so strong that it's powerful enough to fool even the brightest among us: propaganda. But perhaps no propaganda piece was as popular or effective as Jump Jim Crow, which was invented and played by this man, Thomas D. Rice, using burnt chalk to get his skin that dark color. He's also known as the father of minstrel shows. Many negative stereotypes about Black people are born right here. Jim Crow is depicted as incompetent and childish. And we all know that children need to be given orders and directed by their superiors for their own good. And so this sense of dependency was used to justify slavery and to change the narrative that, yeah, humans owning other humans may be inhumane, but maybe it's necessary for those kinds of people. Jim Crow was also depicted as lazy, which is a very popular stereotype among Black people. Now, I always found it a bit ironic to call people who were literally slaving away, working 15-hour days, literally passing out of exhaustion, lazy. But again, this was used to justify slavery. They said, hey, you know, they're so lazy that if we didn't enslave them, they'd basically be sitting around doing nothing anyway, so we're really doing them a favor. I mean, there are even politicians today that peddle this narrative of slavery holding benefits. I mean, this idea isn't new. It's literally hundreds of years old, and back then, it worked. If you're wondering if this was effective, the short answer is yes. Jump Jim Crow was so popular that it basically launched minstrel shows themselves, and those were so popular that they made their way overseas and received praise from the likes of Mark Twain and Abraham Lincoln. Minstrel shows are actually considered the first uniquely American form of professional entertainment, and it created the setup for stand-up comedy and introduced the banjo in mainstream music. These shows was the first thing that many Americans learned about Black people, especially in the North where there was low Black population. And the first thing you see about someone or something is often what sticks the most. These stereotypes that carry the purpose of portraying Black people as incapable of living as free citizens and being content with slavery themselves and being seen as too lazy to be productive without direction were extremely successful at upholding slavery in society. But it gets even darker, as some stereotypes and propaganda was used to justify other things. The Jezebel stereotype used imagery to portray Black women as hypersexual, constantly seducing people to fulfill her own lustful desires.
I suggest that while you're on this ship, you wear something a little less revealing.
Does it bother the captain?
But the opposite was true. And to lull the public into ignoring or accepting these realities, there was Jezebel. If they wanted it themselves, then it wasn't an issue. And if that didn't work, there was the Mammy stereotype, which among other things was used to depict Black women as unattractive. Why would these slave owners abuse their hideous slaves when they had beautiful white women at home? But abuse did happen, and for Celia, it happened almost every day. She was only 14 when she was purchased by a man named Robert Newsom, who was 60 years old. She was the only female slave that he had, and he intentionally isolated her from the male slaves. And from the day that she was purchased began a 5-year spree of constant abuse and rape. He even got her pregnant up to 2 times. On one night, when she was feeling ill from a now 3rd pregnancy at only 19 years old, he again forced himself on her. But this time, something snapped. In a struggle, she hit him over the head twice with a stick. And upon realizing that this had actually killed him, she tried to cover it up, but later confessed. Though due to her status, she wasn't able to testify on her own behalf at trial, she was given legal counsel. And her defense argued a point in Missouri law that said that homicide may be seen as justifiable if committed by a person resisting a felony, which in her case, she was. The team even mentioned that Missouri law did not make any distinctions by race, but the judge promptly reminded the jury that Celia was a slave, and slaves were property, and property could not legally consent. And so the all-white jury subsequently sentenced her to death by hanging. Judge A. Leon Higginbotham, who's also a civil rights historian, slammed the decision, saying that a slave woman had no virtue that the law would protect against a master's lust. And with stereotypes like Jezebel and Mammy, this heinous cycle would continue without any sort of consequences on the part of the white slave owners. There are still some huge stereotypes that cause massive problems today. In 1995, researchers coined the term stereotype threat, which refers to the pressure and the anxiety that people face when they're at risk of confirming a stereotype about their group.
So what Steele and Aronson did was they took black and white Stanford students and they gave them GRE questions. So the GRE is the Graduate Record Examination, and it's kind of similar to the SAT. So they gave them test questions from the GRE, but half of the students were told that this was an assessment of their innate intelligence, and the other half were told that this was just a problem-solving task. And the question was, would these different descriptions of the same questions cause differences in performance? And what Steele and Aronson found was that it did cause a difference in performance. And this difference occurred for black students who believed that these questions were assessing their innate intelligence. And these students had a tendency to do worse than would be expected. Because they said for a black student, this creates anxiety of confirming a negative stereotype. So the idea is that there are negative stereotypes for blacks and intelligence, and that being told you're taking an intelligence test is going to activate that negative stereotype. And you're going to have this additional anxiety of not wanting to confirm this. You don't want people to think that this stereotype is true. You want to make sure that you do well on this intelligence test to show them that the stereotype is not true. But this means you're experiencing more anxiety than the white student next to you taking the same test. And the idea of stereotype threat is that this additional anxiety is what actually hinders your performance.
Now, one stereotype that I didn't touch upon in this video is how black males are often labeled as criminals or dangerous. And that stereotype played a huge role in the controversial case that would see the youngest person in modern US history put to death by the electric chair. Check out this video to learn more about that.